Welcome everyone to a demonstration of the market rate lease transition model. This model should be used in the transition year mainly for for-profit entities, but also for not-for-profit entities which have market value leases and have been classified as operating leases. You'll notice that the tabs in blue on the bottom are the inputs tabs. I'll now hand over the demonstration to David Holland, partner and author of the Lease Standard Suite of Solutions.
So the first tab you should go to is the user guide. That will give you an explanation of all the different parts, and you should use that in conjunction with the video. I then go to the time series tab, and the time series tab sets the parameters. So in this case, we've set it to a typical June year end. The earliest start date of any lease that we're transitioning is 2010 July, and the latest end date of any lease that we're transitioning is June 2040. Denomination's dollars, and the transitional year in this case is 2020. So you need to be aware which year end and which transitional year you're at. December year ends will start the transition. They're 31 December 2019. Most other year ends will all be in the transitional year of 2020. The last time series entry you need to make is which is the last historical month. And this is very important in what drives the model. So in this case, it's June 2018, because even though we're transitioning in June 2020, we don't have any historical data prior to June 2018. So this model will typically be used for people when they're providing information in note 1 of their accounts about the likely impact of transitioning to this standard. When you are actually transitioning in 30 June 2020, then that last historical month would be June 2019. It's important that that last historical month is not in the actual year that you're in, and I'll explain why as we go along. Once you've input the last historical month, you then need to move along and go to the historical payments tab. So depending on where you set that month, when you move along to the historical payments tab, you'll see here that 2016, 17 and 18 are all historical with a H in the brackets. 2019 and 20 are forecast. So this requires user input for any leases that you're going to transition for the historical years. So what were your historical monthly payments? And these are the payments that were on the last day of that year. So if it's 2016, it's the financial year 2016. What was your monthly payment in June 2016? What was your monthly payment in June 2017? What was your monthly payment in June 2018? So you input that for all of your leases. You then move along to the Lease Assumption tab, and you start to input your leases. So we've only got 2 leases in here as an example, but you'll see here that you can type in the lease name. I will come back to column G, the options. You'll need to decide them down the track. Put in the lease start date, September 2015. And if we go to the historical payments, that's why the first historical year is financial year ended 2016. What is the term of the lease? And what are the payments? Now, the payments assume that it's the start of the period after the last historical month. So this is what's so critical about the last historical month. You set it to June 2018 for a June year end. So 1 July 2018, when you start that 2019 year, what was your payment in that month? What was your increase, if you had an annual increase, and what month did that occur? So what this model will do is that in September of 2019, it'll then increase that monthly payment by 4%, and it'll do it every year to forecast out the models. Did you have a fit out contribution? What's the useful life of that? Because it may be different to your lease life. Is there a make good at the end? you'll need to find an incremental borrowing rate. So IFRS 16 works primarily off an incremental borrowing rate. And so that's something that's a user input. You could look at recent borrowings, or you might need corporate finance advice. Many leases start with a rent-free period. And in this case, we've put in one for 6 months. And then we've got an extension period. So this was originally a 60-month lease, but it had an option to extend for another 60 months. Where you're reasonably certain of that, then you need to input a number into this cell, and the model will actually work off including that option period. So you don't put in all option periods, you only put in option periods that the client is reasonably certain of exercising. Now, I thought I'd come back to talk about the options. The standard gives effectively 3 transitional options. Now, many people will say that there's actually only 2 in the standard. The first being retrospective application, as if the standard always applied. The second is prospective application, in other words, from the start of the year that you adopt this standard. However, as part of that, the standard permits, and this is why I've got options 2 and options 3, that while you look at the lease liability prospectively, you have a choice to either set the right of use asset as if the standard always applied, or the right of use asset equal to the lease liability, plus or minus any adjustments for lease accruals and prepayments. So the second option, the prospective option, really has 2 limbs, option 2 and 3. At this stage, you don't need to set the options until you go and have a look at the analysis. But when you do set the options, under the requirements of the standard, if you choose option 1, every lease has to be transitioned under option 1. If you choose a prospective option, then you can pick and choose between leases for option 2 and option 3. So once you've inserted those 3 tabs, you've filled out the time series, you've included any historical payments, you've included the lease assumptions, then I advise the next tab that you should work along. A lot of these tabs here that aren't in blue are actually driving the model and calculations tab that you don't necessarily have to get into a lot of detail. But the next tab I would go to is actually the option analysis tab. And what the option analysis tab, you can see here that we've input 2 leases. We've got the first lease, we've got the second lease. The option analysis tab will show you an analysis of what it looks like under the existing standard and under the 3 transitional options for both the comparative year and the actual year. So that gives you a really good guide to have a look and decide what are the impacts likely to be under each of those options. It also provides you with the journal entries under each of these options. Now, I think it's important to highlight some of the dates here is that under option 1, if you apply it as if the standard always applied, it goes back to the start of your comparative year. So we're transitioning here at 30 June 2020. Option 1 actually goes and prepares journal entries here on the 1st of July 2018. Whereas option 2 and 3 only start from the start of the actual year, 1 July 2019. So very different dates. And the financial statement impact over on this side is at the year end. So just be aware of which dates are actually doing what. So once you've analysed what you want to do there, you would then go back to the lease assumption tab and actually choose options. So in this case, if we choose option 1 for both scenarios, then you can either prepare journal entries on a lease by lease basis here, depending on what your ledger system is, or you can move over to the Consolidated Leases tab. And the Consolidated Leases tab will show you what the journal entry will be for all the leases you've input into the model. And because we've chosen option 1, the journal entry is 1 July 2018, shows you what those overall journal entries are. If, for instance, you decided to transition the first lease under option 2, as I said, you are prevented if you choose option 2 for one lease to have option 1 for any of the leases, but you can choose between option 2 and 3. So you might choose lease 1 under option 2, lease 2 under option 3. The consolidated lease tab changes the date over to the 1st of July 19 and actually brings together the journal entries from option 2 and 3 and consolidates that through. So if you went over here and you looked at the difference between option 2 here for the first lease and option 3 for the second lease, you added those together, that's your journal entry there. If you want a nice board report for the board, then there's a nice flow chart showing what is the impact between transitioning under this standard for EBITDA, net profit, etc. over the next 10 years. So I think that's a good analysis there as well. Okay, so hopefully that's a quick overview of how you might like to use the at-market lease transition tool, and all the best for using it.